Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tracing an absolutely whiplash-inducing journey through modern music history. We're talking about a group of guys who literally crawled out of the gutters of the 1980s Los Angeles rock scene, armed with nothing but cheap booze, serious attitude, and just this unparalleled raw talent. I mean, they lived a life of unbridled studio debauchery that genuinely terrified record executives. And yet, fast forward a few decades, and the very anthems that defined their reckless rebellion are actually being used to teach classic literature in high school and college classrooms. It kind of makes you stop and think, right? How exactly did rock's most dangerous band, a group completely synonymous with riots, bitter feuds, and late-night destruction, become the cornerstone of a structured English lesson? Well, that is exactly the narrative arc we're unpacking today. Because to really understand how they ended up on a syllabus, we have to understand the madness that built them in the first place. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's how we're breaking it all down. First up, appetite for chaos. Then, crafting the signature sound. Third, fractures and feuds. And finally, an unlikely educational legacy.
Starting with part 1, appetite for chaos.
You see, before the sold-out stadiums and the private jets, there was just raw, unpolished squalor. Guns N' Roses didn't just write about the gritty reality of the streets. They were entirely consumed by it. Before they even nailed down a stable lineup, bassist Duff McKagan talked about how they booked this punk rock-style hell tour up to Seattle. Picture this, they're making maybe $125 a week, living in absolute filth, literally sleeping on people's floors. But that poverty, that desperation, it acted like a pressure cooker. It birthed this authentic, aggressive hunger that you just cannot manufacture in some corporate boardroom.
And you know that chaotic reputation of theirs? It wasn't a clever marketing gimmick. It was a highly documented reality. Take the recording of Rocket Queen, for example, the closing track on their debut album. Axl Rose decided the track needed, something a little extra. So he actually brought a woman named Adriana Smith into the vocal booth to record a live intimacy session, just to capture the audio for the song's bridge. It's wild anecdotes exactly like this that proved their danger was 100% genuine.
And man, did that raw, unfiltered danger resonate globally. Their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, didn't just succeed, it exploded. We're talking a staggering 30 million units sold worldwide. It remains one of the most successful debut albums in human history. They skyrocketed from scrounging on a $125 a week hell tour to suddenly staring at royalty checks they couldn't even comprehend.
Moving right along to part 2, crafting the signature sound.
Because look, behind all the crazy headlines and the hotel trashing, there was a meticulous, deliberate craft anchoring their massive success. You don't just accidentally sell 30 million records by being wild. Take a look at Slash's iconic gear load out here. These are basically the essential ingredients to a legendary recipe. It wasn't overly complicated, but it was highly specific. You got his 1959 Les Paul replica, which was used for almost all of Appetite. He'd occasionally swap in a BC Rich Mockingbird. Powering all of this was the warm, roaring distortion of modified Marshall amps, specifically the JCM 800s and Silver Jubilees. Throw in a Jim Dunlop Crybaby wah pedal, and boom, you have that instantly recognizable, vocal-like guitar tone that literally defined a generation.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the deep technical musicality found in their rhythm section. Guitarist Gilby Clarke actually broke down the difference between the band's two famous drummers, and it's super revealing. You have original drummer Steven Adler, who played with this distinct swing. Clarke points out that Adler didn't hit as hard, but he played with the guitar, which gave those early tracks this groovy, loose feel. Contrast that with his replacement, Matt Sorum. Sorum was an absolute powerhouse. He brought way more snap and laid down this rigid, thunderous beat that the rest of the band had to play too. It's just a brilliant illustration of the sophisticated musical mechanics humming right beneath their chaotic image.
Which brings us to part 3, fractures and feuds.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real turning point. As they blew up into the biggest rock act on the planet in the early 90s, the shared squalor they originally bonded over was swapped out for private planes, massive egos, and deep, deep divisions. Just look at the Use Your Illusion era. The band was basically suffocating under its own bloat. Suddenly you had grand pianos, horn sections, backup singers, ridiculously late stage times. The tight-knit gang from the LA strip clubs was fracturing, and communication completely broke down. Ultimately, this fracture led to rhythm guitarist and primary songwriter Izzy Stradlin walking away in 1991. The narrative inside the band was incredibly tense. From Slash's perspective, the touring schedule was just grueling. And Izzy didn't want to put in the work to keep this massive machine moving. As Slash put it, he just bailed, and we took that really personally. But then you hear Izzy's perspective, and it is incredibly revealing. He said, "I had a bus, they had a plane, and I beat 'em to the gig." Izzy felt Axl was turning their collaborative band into a total tyranny, where schedules simply didn't matter anymore. That quote perfectly captures the total breakdown in their relationships. I mean, they weren't even traveling in the same state, let alone the same vehicle. The absolute final nail in the coffin for that classic lineup came a few years later over, of all things, a Rolling Stones cover. While they were recording Sympathy for the Devil for a movie soundtrack, Axl secretly brought in his childhood friend Paul Huge to play guitar over Slash's parts. For Slash, hearing this, what he called a twingy little thing in the background over his own playing was the absolute last straw. He walked out, and just like that, the golden era was over. And finally, part 4, an unlikely educational legacy. Here is where our story takes just a fascinating, completely unexpected turn. The band might have imploded, but their cultural impact only matured. Enter Dr. William Visco, who published an academic paper through the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Visco actually developed a framework for using pop culture and rock music to build positive relationships with students and teach complex literary analysis. And right at the center of his academic curriculum, you guessed it, Guns N' Roses. So the crucial point is how perfectly this actually maps out in a classroom. Dr. Visco has his students take the song Welcome to the Jungle, a track literally born out of the exact street chaos we talked about earlier, and he maps it directly to William Golding's classic novel Lord of the Flies. Both of these texts heavily explore the theme of decivilization and man's inherent capacity for evil. By analyzing the aggressive lyrics of rock's most volatile band, students are effortlessly bridged into high-level academic literary analysis. It is an absolutely brilliant full-circle moment. And if you trace their timeline, it becomes incredibly clear that the music's legacy totally outlasted the bitter feuds. After that messy late 90s breakup and Axl's legendary decade-long quest to finally release Chinese Democracy in 2008, the unthinkable actually happened. In 2016, Axl, Slash, and Duff reunited for the perfectly named Not in This Lifetime tour. The music had survived the chaos, survived the massive egos, and had ingrained itself so deeply into our culture that they could come back and fill stadiums all over the world, all over again. Which leaves us with this final thought. We've just seen how the gritty, unpolished rebellion of a group of guys sleeping on dirty floors evolved into a profound tool for academic learning. It just proves that serious depth and value can be found in the absolute most unlikely of places. So I have to ask you, if rock's most chaotic band can be used to perfectly teach classic literature, what other hidden lessons are waiting to be uncovered in your own favorite music, movies, or pop culture? Keep looking closely, because the curriculum is everywhere. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you on the next one.